Good afternoon. I'd like to introduce David, project manager and lecturer, and an extremely good person to have in your team. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for attending this talk today. The focus for this talk today is going to be looking at some project management aspects, and specifically looking at some key topics that will help you when you are looking to make that transition from a developer-based role to a Drupal project manager based role. Now, oftentimes when we are working as a developer or a technical lead, you're going to have a lot of knowledge of the inner workings of a project, specifically the technical side of that project. It could be a website build project, could be a support project, could be an uplift, an assessment. All sorts of different types of projects. And you probably also have a good working relation with your client. That might be through ticket communications, tech demonstrations, training, explanations, all sorts of things. But there's quite a bit of skills there that can be a little bit daunting to approach, especially when you are making that transition. Okay, so let's get the boring stuff out of the way. A little bit about me first. I'm David. I am a delivery manager at Morpht. I was born and raised in Sydney, but I am Canberra-based now. Why you should listen to me ramble on today? Well, my journey as a developer started off as a freelancer, as I'm sure lots of you did. Most of the time working with startups and small local businesses. From there, I joined the University of Canberra web team, which led me into consulting. Yay! After that, went into the APS, stayed there for a while, and then decided to commit myself to Drupal and moved around Drupal web agencies, while also moonlighting as a lecturer at the ANU. Okay, so that's out of the way. I want to talk to you about the life cycle of a project. Now, I'm sure that almost everyone here knows a lot about the project lifecycle. And a lot of you would have a lot of experience working in a variety of different types of projects. And you would be aware that a project goes through different phases. You might start off with a setting up phase that goes into establishment. You're setting the goals, looking at expectations, planning how everything's going to happen. And you're having that initial communication with your clients. Then that progresses to some form of discovery. You might have interviews and stakeholder engagement. Maybe you're making some assessments, documentation, and all the moving parts that happens before you actually start to code. And look, as developers, we might be a little bit more involved in the documentation and the actual coding part of the project, but not so much in the initial steps. So I'm going to focus on that kind of initial area first, and I'm going to look at this key topic here, which is setting expectations. So when you're first discussing a project, you're going to have your first initial meeting with your client, and probably one of the most important things is to make sure that you are setting your expectations early. And I've got a nice little image here. Very, very good topic here that says clearly defined expectations will prevent issues and establish a path for success. And that's completely right. You might think, well, how do I do that? How do I set my expectations? Okay, there are a couple of obvious things to consider here. And, they might be obvious on paper, but a little bit more challenging when you're actually implementing them. Communication, everyone's favorite word. The first step to setting your expectations is to communicate them with your stakeholder, with your client. You want to ask the questions like, what do you expect from your client? What can or should they expect from you? And this can go all the way from expectations about what you're delivering to expectations about the project as a whole. It could be more granular expectations about communication, how often you're going to be meeting with your client, reporting expectations, Maybe there's a specific response time requirement there that you have to adhere to. So there's a lot of different things that can go into expectations. Maybe the expectation is that you're working towards a constricted timeline. You need to deliver a specific project within a specific budget. And this is probably one of the key areas where a lot of issues happen early in a project. Because if this is not clear, when you go into a project, you're going to come in with your mindsets. Your client, your stakeholders are going to come in with a different mindset. And if you are not on the same page, there is going to be a clash there of your expectations and their expectations of you. And of course, you might get lucky. You might come in with a very similar mindset, and then it all works out. So it's not the end of the world. And of course, you can always course correct as well. You can take a step back and backtrack and reconsider your expectations. But this is definitely a key thing to be able to deliver your project successfully. Now, the next point I'm going to step on here is the goal. Now, that's such a simple thing, right? You might think, obviously, I'm going to ask what the goal of my project is. But sometimes, especially in an agile project, or even in a project that's a little bit more exploratory, the goal is something that gets missed. You might be talking about all sorts of activities that you need to conduct. You need to do stakeholder interviews, you need to do discovery activities, you need to fix this button, you need to do this and that, and then all of a sudden you get bogged down by all the series of activities that you need to be delivering instead of focusing on the goal that you have to deliver. So, 3 questions you should ask. What is the goal? What are you trying to solve? What are you delivering? Very important stuff. I can't tell you how many projects I've seen where everyone gets caught up in all the activities that you have to deliver, where at the end of the project, you deliver something and it's not even tied to the goal anymore. I also want to say that as developers, we often get specific tickets or issues, and they come with all sorts of descriptions, implementations, and testing sections. And this is possible because someone at this initial stage has asked these questions. And one final one before we dive into an example: commitment. This kind of covers with your expectations that I covered off earlier, but make sure that you are clear about your commitment to the project, your commitment to the client, to your stakeholder, and what their commitment is to you. Okay, so we're going to look at an example here, and this example is for a project for Music for Canberra. Music for Canberra is a non-for-profit organization. They provide inclusive musical experiences for people of all ages, backgrounds, and abilities in the ACT and surrounding regions. If we look at this project goal, Music for Canberra was working on a project using augmented reality to enhance live classical music concerts. Okay? This is a bit of an exploratory project because there was no defined set of principles of what they were after. What does enhance mean? That was a question. Required research. How can you best enhance live classical music concerts using augmented reality? To give you some more context, the project team were inexperienced. They were fairly novice developers. And the goal was very subjective. So when the team started the project, they came into it with a lot of different expectations, and there was no shared goal. Everyone came in with their own individual thoughts about what the final outcome of the project was going to be. And to add to this pot, the client had specific constraints that they had to work around. And these constraints were not captured as part of the expectations. These constraints were mainly about the location of where the concerts were supposed to be held and the limitations that surrounded those locations. So the problem, what happened? 3 months passed, the team had been busy researching and building away some cool test AR visualizations. And all of a sudden, client was not happy. Level of progress and output that had been delivered in this past 3 months was not good. And it did not fit the idea that they had in their mind. Okay, so the resolution that took place, the project manager took a step back. And I don't want to say they went all the way back to the start of the project, but they took a step back and decided to reevaluate what they were delivering. They started to ask the questions. The client isn't happy. Why is that? What did we miss? What expectations did the client have that we didn't cover off? And they had this emergency meeting where they were able to go back, revisit these points, and come back into the project to deliver the project to the client's satisfaction. In this instance, it worked out. But that won't always be the case. You could be working towards a very tight or restricted budget and blowing it out by, a specific set of months, weeks, whatever it is not gonna be feasible. And then you've got a major project problem in your hands. So, setting expectations at the start of the project, very important. And one thing I'm going to end with, it can be an iterative process as well. You don't have to set all your expectations up front. Especially when you're undertaking these exploratory activities, you will find out more and more about the product as it evolves. And with that can come new expectations. You might have new stakeholders that come into the picture as well. Then again, new expectations arise. Okay, so we talked about setting expectations. What about planning for project success? When you're planning a project, oftentimes the first thing you're going to be looking at is the project description. Maybe you've got to align your resources, look at timelines, things like that. Eventually, if it hasn't been decided for you, you will have to decide what project management methodology to use. And these days, I would say if you're working for an agency or in the private sector, you will most likely be working in Agile. It's just a fact. It's very common. If you go to the APS, it's still common, Agile, but there'll be a bit more of a mix. And this is basically because of the nature of the project and the nature of the stakeholder as well. So just one thing I'm going to touch on here. You don't have to feel restricted to using a specific methodology just because of something you've heard or a specific culture or just using one methodology as well. You can oftentimes have a bit of a hybrid. The main thing you want to consider is that you are adopting a methodology that is going to bring success to your project. There's methodologies that lend themselves well to Agile, and then there's others that lend themselves to others. Or even, as I said, a bit of a hybrid. Okay, so we spoke about the goal just before. The next step is to break up your goals into deliverables and set them with your client. Always set stages, milestones, whatever you want to call them. Break up your deliverables into chunks, even when it might seem intuitive to not do so. Planning for smaller chunks is always easier than planning for a huge milestone or deliverable. You could be working towards the DTA strategy there, where you've got your beta phase, you've got your live phase, you've got your discovery at the start. So let's say we have planned our deliverables, we've set them with the client, and all of a sudden, we are not able to deliver our deliverables. We couldn't deliver them on time. And this can happen. And depending on the nature of the project, it could have a great impact on it, or it could have a smaller impact. The main thing to remember is that you need to plan early for this. When you're planning your deliverables, you're setting your timelines aside, this is something you need to consider. Maybe your plan is to give an extra couple of weeks leeway, could be an extra couple of months leeway, depending on the project. Maybe you want to set aside some extra resources so that you can play catch up. Cool? Works out? The key thing to note is that you should do these before you reach this problem stage. You do not want to be in a situation where all of a sudden you're behind on a project and you have no idea how you're going to catch up. All of that should have already been determined. And if you've got some experience planning projects, this might be intuitive to you. You might already bake this in when you're already thinking about a project. And that's good. And even then, sometimes we've planned for it and still the project doesn't go as we planned and deliverables are not met. So what do? You adapt, you change, and you renegotiate. In some cases, this is going to be very easy. And in other cases, not so much. Okay. How do we try and manage that? Risk management. Very important, doesn't get enough credit. Identifying risk in a project is crucial to mitigating risk. So when do we identify a risk? At the start of a project? Of course, before even starting the project. You should be asking yourselves these questions. It doesn't have to be just questions. You could do it through research. You could do it through analysis. But what potential issues can arise with the project that you're undertaking? For example, could be a big corporation that you're delivering a project for. Multiple stakeholders coming and going. And so the risk is that you do not know the stakeholders that are going to be involved in the project. Okay. That's interesting. You could be developing a specific application maybe, and the risk is going to be inherent to that application maybe. Maybe you don't want your application to get spammed, you don't want it to get hacked, or something else. So, identify your risk, but then how do you manage the risk? Okay, well, you come up with a plan. How can I prevent this from happening? Okay. Once you have your strategy there, it doesn't end there, because then you go to, okay, well, this is happening. What am I going to do about it? In the short example I gave, the risk was stakeholders driving by. Well, at the start of the project, let's get down all the stakeholders. Let's map them out. Let's consult each of them in the timeline to the specific section that they're going to be involved in. All right? We mitigated the risk. Are we done? Not quite. Risk management is ongoing. As you progress with your project, more risks are going to appear. They're going to pop up. And you're just going to have to continue creating mitigation measures for each of them. This can be, a formal process where you are keeping a risk register, or maybe it becomes a little less structured and it's not as formalized. The main thing to remember is that you should always be thinking about this and keeping it in the back of your head. Okay, couple more to go. Looking at communicating with your client or customer. This can be a little bit scary. Oftentimes, we've got someone who is dedicated to communicating effectively with your client or customer. It could be your account manager, project manager, delivery manager. So if you do not have the rapport with them, it can be a little bit daunting. So the first thing I'm going to touch on, and this is probably the simplest thing I can say, greet your client. Show your smile. Be friendly. Be kind. Find common ground. If you're struggling to communicate with your client, talk about the city that you live in. Could be a very similar city to them, could be a drastically different city. You can talk about the weather, location, weekend plans, family plans. Find some common ground. Okay? Now, going back into reporting side of it, report often. Is there a thing as reporting too often? If you report too often and it's too much, your client will just ignore it, most likely. It's not going to harm the project the same way it would if there is a lack of reporting. All right, so you're reporting often. What are you reporting on? 3 key things. Project progress, what's up next, and bring up risks early. I think those are the 3 key things you should remember. Sometimes, you've got budgeting requirements, you've got to report hours, you have to report all sorts of things. But these key 3 topics are what you should be tackling in all your reports. It doesn't have to be a really extensive and long report, just cover off these 3 things. Answer the questions. What has been completed so far? What did you do in the past week, in the past 2 weeks, in the past sprint? And then what's coming up next? Prepare them for what's set to come and bring up risks early if you need to. All right, so you bring up risks, and this is where we go into this area called sugarcoating. Now, oftentimes when things do not go well, we will try to sugarcoat it when we are talking about bad news. We try to make it sound less bad than it is. And some people would say this is great, some people would say this is bad. A bit of mixed opinion. My thoughts on it? Sugarcoat your language, but not your progress. Be gentle when you're delivering bad news, but don't sugarcoat project progress. For example, if you are behind on a deliverable, don't say, oh, we might not meet that deliverable, but it's not going to affect the project. It's going to be okay. We'll catch up straight away. Spell it out as it is. Just sugarcoat your language. Be nice about it. Don't foster a hostile environment, but you still want to deliver the information that is important. And when you deliver the information, and if something's not on track, come prepared to answer the questions of how you're going to get back on track. What are the next steps that you're going to take? What is required from yourself? What is required from your team, from your client? Very important. And then you have this talk, and all of a sudden, you're dealing with a difficult situation, a difficult person. So I've got a couple of things to read out here. If you're dealing with a difficult person, smile, talk it out. Do not engage. It's okay if you don't know. Prove your views, bring supporting artifacts, and compromise. I cannot tell you how many different situations I have been with difficult people where the solution has just been to talk it out. And if you start to feel like you're going to engage, take a break. Know when to step away. If you're not comfortable talking about a topic, you can say, I'm not comfortable talking about this topic at this moment in time, but I will be available to talk about it in so and so. Or if you don't know the answer to something, you could say, I do not know the answer to this question right now, but I will follow this up with so and so. And if you're in an argument, bring supporting artifacts, prove your views, support your findings. And lastly, sometimes you will have to compromise, meet somewhere in the middle. And when things like that happen, staying positive can be hard. So, take a break. Find a de-stress mechanism. Back in COVID shutdown, I used to have a little karaoke box. And whenever I had a very stressful meeting, I would just go in and belt at the top of my lungs. Don't stop believing. Or you can think about the future state of a website. What's the next project that you're going to be working on? Maybe it's a better project. And we're just at the last one here. Know when and how to seek help. Know your limit. It's okay to ask questions. Your team members will be there to help you out. Defer to your supervisor if you need to. I can't tell you how many times I have gone up to one of my team members and asked for help. Sometimes you just do not know the answer to a question, or sometimes you just do not know how to handle a situation. Okay, let's recap. First, set expectations early. Very important. You want to make sure that everyone is on the same page at the start of your project. Define your goals. Make them obvious to you and your client and everyone in the team. Make sure everyone is available and knows what you need to deliver. Report often. There's nothing wrong with reporting often. Stay positive. Look at things in a good way. If a project is not to your liking at the moment, maybe the next one will be better. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Your peers are there to assist you. And lastly, I didn't really touch on this, but iterate and improve. Whether it's through retrospectives, maybe it's through research, maybe analysis. Just make sure you are always innovating and improving. All right, that brings me to the end. So thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, David. Hope there were some good insights there for you guys.